We got some maniacs here tonight.
How does the loudest metal band on earth end up being defined by a love song one of them never even wanted anyone else to hear? Because that's the heart of Metallica. Nothing Else Matters wasn't written for radio. It wasn't written for fans. James Hetfield wrote it alone, missing someone, and he thought it was too personal, too soft to even play for the rest of the band. He almost hit it. Pause and sit with that. This is the band that built its name on speed, aggression, and zero compromise. And the song that broke them into every car stereo in the world is basically a confession. Here's why this matters. Before heavy music was allowed to cry on mainstream radio, there was Metallica. Before stadiums sang along to their pain, they were just a couple of kids from Los Angeles answering a classified ad in a free paper drummer looking for other metal musicians. That ad pulled James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich into the same room in 1981, and that moment is the spark that becomes Metallica. They didn't just make songs, they rewired what metal sounded like in America. They took the raw speed of underground thrash and pushed it onto major labels, MTV, and arenas without watering it down. By the mid-'80s, they were already reshaping the future of heavy music, and they were doing it their way. But there's a cost nobody saw from the cheap seats. September 27th, 1986, northern Sweden, the tour bus skids, flips, and their 24-year-old bassist Cliff Burton, the musical anchor, the soul of the band, is thrown from his bunk and killed instantly. Metallica is supposed to be unstoppable at this point. Instead, they're standing in the cold on the side of a road, looking at wreckage. The band will never sound the same again. And here's the turn. That kind of loss doesn't just disappear. It hardens you. It builds walls. It tells you never show weakness again. And for years, Metallica lived like that, so when Nothing Else Matters shows up later, vulnerable, open, human, it's not just a ballad, it's a break in the armor. It's the moment the world realizes Metallica isn't only rage and riffs. There are real people under all that volume, and at the exact same time, some of their own hardcore fans call it betrayal, sellout, too soft, too clean, too emotional. That's the tension driving this whole story. This is not just the Metallica story. This is the fight between image and truth, between we're invincible and we almost fell apart, between the band that swore they'd never bend for anyone, and the song that proved they were already changing the shape of rock for everyone. Across the next chapters, you're going to see how Metallica goes from a garage band built off a newspaper ad to grieving brothers trying to hold it together, to the most powerful heavy band on the planet, to almost blowing themselves up from the inside. And you're going to see why Nothing Else Matters is not the soft moment, it's the survival moment. So let's roll it back to the beginning, before the billion streams, before MTV, before the ballad that started fights in parking lots. Let's go to 1981, Los Angeles, a rented room, and a drummer with an ad in the recycler. In 1981 and 1982, rock on mainstream U.S. radio was glossy, safe, and built for MTV. MTV had just launched in August 1981 and was turning bands into television products, eyeliner, big hair, neon lights, and hooks you could sell to teenagers. The Sunset Strip in Los Angeles was already moving toward glam metal, teased hair, leather, eyeliner, and sex sells attitude. Bands like Motley Crue were working the clubs, mixing image and shock to get noticed, and that was what labels wanted, something you could photograph, something you could put on TV. The Strip was crowded with guys trying to be stars, flyers taped to light poles, drinking in the rainbow, begging for stage time. It looked dangerous, but it was also business. Image mattered as much as the music at the exact same time. Something else in heavy music was quietly boiling under the surface. Across the ocean, in the UK, there was this wave called the New Wave of British Heavy Metal. Bands like Diamond Head, Angel Witch, Saxon, and Tigers of Pantang, they weren't pretty. They were fast, sharp, and hungry. They took the speed and anger of punk and welded it to metal. Lars Ulrich, a young Danish kid living in California, was obsessed with that sound. He wasn't looking for American radio metal. He wanted the British underground. Speed, danger, attitude. When he put an ad in the Los Angeles paper The Recycler in 1981, drummer looking for other metal musicians to jam with, influences Diamond Head, Tigers of Pantang, Iron Maiden. Most of the people who answered didn't even know those names. They were like, yeah, I love heavy metal. Styx, Kansas, Van Halen. To Lars, that wasn't heavy enough. He wanted something that didn't exist yet in America. That ad is how James Hetfield walks into the story. Hetfield shows up quiet, guarded, physically tense, huge rhythm tone in his right hand. Lars and James connect because they both feel a little outside. Neither one fits the Sunset Strip pretty boy model. They're not trying to get signed by looking sexy in a photo. They're trying to be the heaviest band anyone's ever heard. They start building a band in Los Angeles with Ron McGovney on bass and soon after Dave Mustaine on lead guitar. That early version of Metallica is fast and raw, but what matters is the attitude. This is music meant to crack teeth, not land on MTV between commercials. Their first original songs, Hit the Lights, The Mechanics, Seek and Destroy in early form, are already more violent and more intense than what LA radio is playing. Here's the first shift in energy. Even in those early days, Metallica isn't thinking local, they're thinking network. Tape trading is huge in the underground scene. You record a demo, you duplicate it, and it gets passed hand to hand, state to state, even overseas. In July 1982, they record a demo called No Life Till Leather. It's rough, it's fast, and it sounds like someone lit gasoline under classic metal riffs. That cassette doesn't just sit in LA, it explodes through the tape trader world. Kids who've never seen the band live are suddenly writing their name on school notebooks. That homemade tape is the thing that starts turning Metallica from LA weird speed band into a rumor with weight. And rumors travel faster than record labels. But here's the problem with LA for this band. Los Angeles loves the show. Metallica wants the power. They don't care about eyeliner, they care about impact. And the person who makes that difference is a bass player named Cliff Burton. Hetfield and Ulrich first hear Cliff playing with his band Trauma. What they hear is not normal bass. It's like a lead instrument, huge, distorted, melodic, and violent at the same time. Cliff is from the Bay Area, the scene around San Francisco and the East Bay, and he has his own code. He tells them straight, I'm not moving to LA. If you want me, you move here. So Metallica leaves Los Angeles and relocates north to the Bay. That move matters. It's not just a new bass player, it's a new identity. The Bay Area scene is different, less makeup, more aggression, more mix of punk energy with metal precision. That's where thrash is about to be born. Now we're in late 82 and into 83, and what's happening in the Bay is not pretty or polished. It's fast, physical, almost violent. Crowds are diving off stages. Everybody is young, broke, and dead serious. Local clubs like The Stone and places like Ruthie's Inn are letting this new sound take over nights. People who see Metallica for the first time in San Francisco don't compare them to the radio rock of the time. They say it feels like punk with long hair. It's that intense. The Bay becomes the engine room for a new kind of American metal, harder than what the Sunset Strip was selling and way more real to the kids in the crowd. Thrash metal, as a word, is just starting to form. Metallica is at the center of it, and this is where the outside world finally notices that No Life Till Leather tape lands in the hands of John Zazula, an East Coast record store guy and small label hustler who is running Megaforce Records. He doesn't hear a club band. He hears something that could scare the entire industry. He signs them, gives them a budget, and by May 1983, Metallica is in New York recording what becomes their first album on July 25th, 1983. That record comes out. The title is Kill 'Em All. The sound is speed, whiplash riffing, and zero apology. A lot of people point to that album and say, this is the moment thrash metal is officially real. This is the line in the sand saying, we are not that MTV hair band, we are something else. So in just about 2 years, quoted from an ad in a free paper, to a rented house full of gear, to a bass player so good he forces the entire band to move cities, to a debut album that sounds like a weapon, Metallica has already broken every rule of how you're supposed to make it in the early 80s. They never chased the big labels in LA. They never softened the sound to get radio. They built their own lane out of speed, rage, and grief. But here's the part almost nobody outside the hardcore fans knew at the time. All of this is happening under stress. The band is already burning from the inside. The sound is getting faster. The crowds are getting bigger, but the chemistry is getting unstable. One key member is about to be told to pack his gear and go. And that decision will split off an entire second giant of metal and lock in Metallica's path for good. That's where we go next. James wasn't built in a label office. He came out of working-class Downey, California. Quiet kid, strict Christian Science home, a house where pain wasn't discussed and doctors were off limits. When his mother died as a teenager, the wound didn't close. It calcified into the steel you hear in his right hand. Before anyone outside the tape trader world knew the name Metallica, James Hetfield already had the voice of a bulldozer and the pen of someone who'd seen faith fail. That personal history, loss, anger, control, starts to hardwire the band's center of gravity, shift the frame. 60 seconds, Lars Ulrich doesn't arrive from the same road. He's a Danish kid raised on jazz records and tennis courts, more organizer than Mystic, landing in Southern California with a brain wired to the new wave of British heavy metal. He's the connector, the engine, the one who treats a band like a mission. That 1981 Recycler ad wasn't just a bulletin board post, it was a blueprint. Drummer looking for other metal musicians, Tigers of Pantang, Diamond Head, Iron Maiden. He wasn't chasing LA radio, he was importing a subculture. That hunger for speed and community is the nervous system of what happens next. Another nudge. Kirk Hammett doesn't show up as a kid learning on stage. He shows up trained. Bay Area lifer, founding guitarist of Exodus, a student of Joe Satriani, who could turn melody into a blade. In April 1983, he takes the flight to New York and slides into Metallica just before the first album. On Ride the Lightning, 84, Kirk's phrasing opens the roof. Lead lines that sing without softening the blow. Suddenly, this isn't only speed, it's composition. Hold that thought and drop to the low end, because the axis of 1984 to 86 is Cliff Burton. Cliff isn't a bassist. He's a composer who happens to play bass, a Castro Valley metalhead with classical instincts and a wah pedal, turning low frequencies into lead architecture. The bell-tolling climb that opens For Whom the Bell Tolls. That's Cliff's distorted singing bass, written before he even joined the band. His presence is why the band leaves LA for the Bay and why Metallica's heaviness starts sounding smarter. Energy shift. Now watch the riding jump. Summer 1984. Copenhagen Ride the Lightning lands. The tempos are still feral, but the ideas are bigger. Fade to black, dares to be quiet, then explodes. For Whom the Bell Tolls turns literature into a march. Creeping death makes Old Testament plague feel like a stadium chant. It's no longer a fast club act, it's a world-building band. Another click forward, 1985 bleeds into early 86 at Sweet Silence Studios again. Master of Puppets arrives March 3rd, 1986. Heavier, clearer, more confident. No singles needed, no videos necessary, just 8 tracks that punch, coil, and breathe. It becomes their first RIAA gold, then keeps climbing for decades. More important than the plaque, though, is the message. This band can write epics that still make bodies move. Final nudge of the chapter, they take that record on the road and spend spring and summer 1986 opening for Ozzy Osbourne. Night after night, the underground band is stealing oxygen in arenas built for someone else's legend. The machine is humming, Lars driving, James anchoring, Kirk flashing, Cliff elevating, unstoppable, or so it looks from the cheap seats. Curiosity Gap, where we go next. On a cold European road, the band that seemed invincible hits the kind of wall you don't play through. The music will survive. The people have to decide how. It's a little after 6 a.m. on September 27th, 1986, on a dark Swedish highway. Metallica is on the European leg of the Damage Inc. tour, supporting Master of Puppets. The bus is supposed to be carrying 4 young guys who feel untouchable: James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, Kirk Hammett, and 24-year-old bassist Cliff Burton from Stockholm down toward their next stop. Then the bus starts to fishtail. The driver later says he hit black ice. The bus leaves the road, flips, and throws Cliff straight through the window. When the bus comes down, it comes down on him. He's gone instantly. He's 24 years old. That's the moment everything stops sounding like a rising band and starts sounding like a life or death question. Is Metallica over now? Pause here because this is important. Up to this point, the story has been all acceleration. Ride the Lightning in 1984 turns them from loud kids into writers. Fade to Black, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Creeping Death. These aren't just riffs, they're statements. Then Master of Puppets drops in March 1986 and proves they can be brutal and smart at the same time. No radio single, no glossy video, and still they're big enough to tour arenas with Ozzy Osbourne. The plan is global takeover, and then overnight they're standing in the cold on the side of a Swedish road, looking at twisted metal, trying to understand how you go from unstoppable to broken in 1 second. Here comes the first shift in energy. Cliff Burton wasn't just the bass player. He's the reason Metallica sounds like Metallica in this era. He brought melody, strange harmony, classical ideas, that singing, distorted bass intro you hear in For Whom the Bell Tolls. He's the one who convinced them to leave LA and live in the Bay, where the scene was heavier, faster, less fake. He's also the emotional center. So when Cliff dies, it's not just grief, it's identity shock. Who are we without this guy? Do we even deserve to keep going without this guy? That's the conversation. Now watch what happens next. Because this is the formation moment most bands never survive. They cancel shows, they go quiet. For a minute, it feels like Metallica might just end at age 24, but instead of shutting down, they make a decision that sounds cold from the outside and necessary from the inside. We keep moving, we keep touring, we keep playing Cliff's parts, we keep his name in the set list, and we don't fade out. And to do that, they need someone to step into the scariest open seat in metal. Jason Newsted walks in. Jason's not an industry hire. He's not a suit decision. He's a kid out of Phoenix thrash band Flotsam and Jetsam. He's fast, he's hungry, and he knows the catalog front to back because he's already been studying them like a fan. Metallica brings him in, runs him through auditions, and in late October 1986, literally weeks after Cliff's death, they pick him. On October 28, 1986, he's officially in. They're not healed, they're not okay, they're just refusing to die. Listen to how this locks. The first time Jason plays with them, it doesn't sound like a tribute band trying to fake the old lineup. It sounds like Impact. Everyone in the room can feel that they could still hit at full force. The vibe is not, let's be careful. The vibe is, we're not letting this collapse. That's the instant where the new version of Metallica forms. James up front, Lars driving, Kirk slicing, and now Jason, the new kid, holding down lines that were written by a guy they all considered family. Here's the second shift in energy. Within 6 weeks of Cliff's death, Metallica is already back on stage, starting with warm-up club shows in California in early November, then flying to Japan. From the outside, it looks ruthless. From the inside, it's survival. Playing is the only way not to drown. They're still technically on the Damage Inc. tour, still playing the Master of Puppets material, but mentally, they're in a different story now. This isn't just a tour anymore, it's proof of life. And now comes the part that almost feels like myth garage days. In 1987, instead of pretending everything is fine and jumping straight into, okay, here's the next polished studio album, they do something ugly, loud, and honest. They go into Lars Ulrich's garage, soundproof it, and bash through covers of the bands that built them, late 70s and early 80s underground metal and punk. Diamond Head, Budgie, Misfits. This becomes the 598 EP. Garage Days Revisited, released August 1987. They even joke on the sticker, if they try to charge more, steal it. It's raw on purpose. It's messy on purpose. It's not corporate grief counseling. It's 4 guys in a room, including Jason, credited in the liner notes as Master J New Kid, proving they're still a unit. This is Jason's first official release with Metallica. And the first thing the world hears from the band after Cliff's death. And here's why this chapter matters to the whole story. This is where Metallica becomes more than the Cliff Burton era band. This is where they become the Machine, not in a cold corporate sense, in a survival sense. They take shock and turn it into output. They take guilt and turn it into momentum. They refuse the normal rock and roll script where tragedy, breakup, or tragedy, nostalgia act. They choose forward, but forward has a cost. Because the next step after Garage Days is not just keep touring. The next step is And Justice for All. It's long, technical, bitter, political, and it's where Metallica does something they swore they didn't need. They make a music video, a video that lands on MTV, drags them into the mainstream, and changes what heavy is allowed to look like on television. That's the next chapter, and that's also the next fracture. In 1988, Metallica arrived for real. Their 4th album, with Justice for All, comes out. First full album with Jason Newsted. First full statement after Cliff. It's long, cold, technical, angry, and it does something almost nobody in the mainstream thought possible. It explodes. The record climbs into the U.S. top 10 and peaks at number 6 on the Billboard 200. That's a thrash metal band. No radio single, no glossy MTV. Smile. Sitting next to pop acts and major label rock gods. That's the first detonation. And listen to what they're actually giving people. Justice is not party music. The guitars are dry and sharp. The drums sound like someone hitting sheet metal in an airplane hangar. The bass is buried to almost nothing. The songs are long, twisting, full of tempo changes, full of anger about war, corruption, and bodies being used by systems bigger than them. This is not feel-good rock. It's more like a courtroom. It's protest music in armor. Critics say it's too cold, too long, too cruel. Fans say, play it louder. Here's the first shift in energy. They take this record on the road. The Damage Justice Tour starts in September 1988, and it doesn't stop until October 1989. 200-plus shows, 5 legs. Europe, North America, Australia, South America. It's their first full world tour with Newsted on bass, and night after night, they're not opening anymore. They're headlining. They're stealing crowds. They're proving that Cliff's death did not end them. Imagine being 19 and seeing that live for the first time. Lights down, Blackened starts, and you're getting hit with a wall of rhythm and legal rage. For a lot of kids, but that's the moment they chose sides. They weren't just fans of a band, they were Metallica people. Now here's where everything changes for them and for metal. Up to this point, Metallica had a rule: no music videos. MTV was seen as fake, soft, made for hairspray and choreographed pouts. That's not who they were, but in early 1989, they break their own rule and release a video for the song One. It's almost 8 minutes long. It's black and white. It's not sexy. It's not funny. It's not fun. It cuts between the band playing in an empty warehouse and footage from a 1971 anti-war film called Johnny Got His Gun about a soldier who survives World War I with no arms, no legs, no face, trapped in his own body. That is what they choose as their first visual introduction to MTV. And here's what's wild: MTV can't ignore it. One hits rotation and surges. Viewers start voting it to the top of call-in countdowns. This is a song with machine gun drums about mutilation and trauma with no chorus you can dance to, and it becomes their breakout TV moment. One becomes Metallica's first U.S. charting single, climbing into the Billboard Hot 100. All of a sudden, the underground band is sitting in living rooms across America. This is the exact point where underground goes prime time. That's detonation number 2, and the press finally wakes up. The same outlets that treated Metallica like noisy outsiders now have to cover them because the numbers are too big to ignore. But the coverage is not all respect. A lot of mainstream critics, older rock writers, industry types still say the same things people always say when something heavy hits the center. Too loud, too negative, too political. Not real musicianship, just noise for angry kids. Meanwhile, the kids are filling arenas. By early 1989, Metallica isn't just respected in metal circles, they're feared. Hair metal bands on the Strip suddenly look silly. They look like a costume compared to how serious One feels. Thrash bands in the underground suddenly see a path. You could be heavy and uncompromising and still break through. The industry realizes something ugly. This might be the next wave and you can't control it. Now we hit the Grammy moment. In February 1989, the Recording Academy invents a brand new category, Best Hard Rock Metal Performance, and everyone assumes Metallica is going to take it. They've just put out And Justice for All, They're Destroying Live, and they've just delivered One, which even MTV had to hand them. Instead, the award goes to Jethro Tull, a classic rock band known for using flute, and the room basically laughs in shock. Even the label for Jethro Tull later jokes in Billboard, calling the flute a heavy metal instrument. For Metallica, that public snub is weirdly perfect. It tells their fans, the old gatekeepers don't get us. We're yours, not theirs. That tension, fans ready to go to war for them, critics and institutions scrambling to explain them, is fuel. That's what powers Metallica into the next phase, because up next, they're about to do something no one thought they would do: change their own sound on purpose. They're about to walk into a studio, bring in an outside producer, slow the songs down, thicken the sound, and write a track so personal and open that half their fan base at the time will scream sellout, while the rest of the world will say, "This is our band now." The world calls that next record the Black Album, and the song at the center of that storm, Nothing Else Matters. In 1991, Metallica stopped being the heaviest band your older cousin swears is real metal and became something a lot bigger and a lot scarier for the industry. This is the moment where it stops being just music. This is where Metallica becomes a way to live. Let's slow down and sit in that. They go into the studio and make their self-titled record, the one everyone calls the Black Album. Fifth record, first with producer Bob Rock. Rock is not underground credibility. Rock is known for making giant radio-ready hard rock records, the kind that blow up on FM radio. Fans are nervous immediately. People are saying, "Are Metallica selling out?" That's the fear. But what actually comes out of those sessions is heavier, thicker, and simpler in a way that hits like a hammer instead of a buzzsaw. Bob Rock changes the approach, shorter songs, fatter sound, everything built to feel massive in an arena, not just fast in a club, and the result is Nuclear. The Black Album drops in 1991 and goes straight to number 1. It holds the top spot on the Billboard 200 for 4 weeks and goes on to sell tens of millions worldwide, more than 30 million across the globe, making it one of the best-selling heavy albums of all time, not just in metal, but in any genre. That's the commercial headline, but the cultural headline is louder. This record doesn't creep into the mainstream. It walks in, plants a flag, and dares radio to say no. Enter Sandman becomes a crossover smash. Stadium chant, football, entrance music, nightmares, childhood fear, religion, death, all wrapped in a hook that even people who hated metal could sing. And now parents groups, newspapers, politicians, the usual voices are saying the same things older people always say when youth culture shifts. Too dark, too violent, this isn't music, it's noise. Meanwhile, kids are blasting it in bedrooms, at practice, in cars with the windows down. For fans, this doesn't feel like a song, it feels like permission. Here comes the first shift in energy, because even with Enter Sandman, nobody was ready for what came next. Nothing else matters. On paper, this song should not exist in 1991 Metallica. It's slow, it's open, it's vulnerable. It was first written by James Hetfield alone, basically as a private thing, a kind of confession that he never intended to show anyone because it felt too personal. He didn't write it to be tough. He didn't write it for radio. He wrote it because he was lonely, and then they recorded, and then they put it on the Black Album, and then on April 20th, 1992, they release it as a single. It hits 134 on the U.S. Hot 100. It goes to number 11 on the U.S. mainstream rock chart. It hits number 6 on the official UK singles chart. In some countries, it goes even higher. This is Metallica, the too heavy for MTV band, now charting with a love song. That's not a hit, that's a line in the culture. Nothing Else Matters tells every kid in a Metallica shirt you're allowed to feel something and still be hard. At the same time, it tells every rock radio programmer you're going to have to let this in. That's why it's myth. The song doesn't just sell copies. It blows a hole in the wall between metal and mainstream, and the video keeps working for decades after. Black and white, stripped down, the band in the studio, no glam, no fake storyline. That video eventually passes 1 billion views on YouTube in August 2021. 1 billion. That is not underground. That is global memory. Now watch how the image hardens. The look in this era is not eyeliner and teased hair. No neon, no leopard print spandex. Metallica steps out in black jeans, black shirts, boots, long hair, no smiles. The vibe is, we work here, we don't pose here. That mattered in the early 90s. This is right as glam metal is starting to fall apart and grunge is about to hit TV. Metallica's visual language says, no costume, no pretty, just force. That becomes the new uniform for angry teenagers. Shorts, work boots, a black tour shirt. You didn't have to dress like a cartoon to belong. You just had to believe. And it's not just fashion, it's attitude. Metallica in 91-92 feels dangerous in a way the mainstream can't easily package. They're now headlining stadiums and festivals. They're louder than almost anyone. They swear on stage. They talk about pain and war and betrayal. Parents and politicians call it aggressive, antisocial, even sick. Fans hear honesty. They hear somebody finally saying out loud what stress, anger, addiction, grief, and isolation actually feel like. Metallica becomes less like a band I listen to and more like the flag I wave. Now the second shift in energy. When you get that big, myth doesn't just come from the music, it comes from chaos around the music. August 8th, 1992, Montreal. Metallica is co-headlining a stadium show with Guns N' Roses. During Fade to Black, a stage pyro misfire goes off under James Hetfield and burns him, second and third degree burns on his arm and hand. He's taken to the hospital. The set ends early. The crowd is angry, expects Guns N' Roses to carry the night. Guns N' Roses cuts their own set short. The stadium turns into a riot. Police cars get flipped, windows smashed, fires in the street. Overnight, the press paints Metallica like some kind of traveling disaster, this unpredictable, dangerous event that leaves property damage behind it. Fans see something different. Our guy almost died on stage, and he still came back to finish the tour. Both versions feed the legend. That's what we mean when we say myth. They weren't just selling albums, they were selling a way to live. For kids, Metallica felt like permission to be angry, to be emotional, to not clean yourself up just to be accepted. For labels, radio, TV networks, and award shows, Metallica was a problem. These guys are too loud to control, too blunt to spin, and too big to ignore. And this problem leaks into everything when Metallica proves you can be that heavy and still go number one with an album that sits on top of Billboard for weeks and a ballad that hits top 40 pop radio. You change the industry math. Suddenly, executives who laughed at thrash in 1984 are scrambling in 1992 to sign anything with a fast double-kick drum. You can feel new subgenres getting money. You can feel the door swing open for harder music on daytime TV. You can feel every local band with a practice space and a cheap 4-track thinking, if they can force the world to hear this, why can't we? But here's the twist. Success this big doesn't just make fans louder. It puts Metallica under a microscope. The same people who worship them for being pure and untouchable start accusing them of going soft the second they slow down, clean up their mixes, and sing about something personal. Even inside their own base, there's now a split. Are Metallica the saviors of heavy music on mainstream radio? Or are they the traitors who tamed it? That split is about to get worse because after the Black Album era, Metallica does something even more shocking than a top 40 ballad. They change on purpose. Haircuts, blues influences, southern groove, weird art direction, shooting down the idea that they have to stay trapped in the same box forever. That next version of Metallica is going to make some fans furious, push others even closer, and end up on stage with a full orchestra. That's where we go next.
This video is sponsored by the Lore Store on Amazon, your one-stop shop for music lovers across reggae, rock, pop, and hip-hop. We built it for real listeners who don't want to dig through 1,000 listings to find the right gear. Inside the Lore Store, you'll find 5 aisles. VIP, top, battle-tested essentials. Headphones, turntables, speakers, gig-safe earplugs, smart speakers. Reggae vibe, roots and lovers. Rock made easy, automatic decks, warm bookshelf speakers, vinyl care. Rock lore, classic rock must-haves, open back cans, simple amps, living room concert vibes. Pop lore, feel-good everyday setups, clean, clear speakers, easy streaming, nostalgia-friendly picks. Hip-hop must-haves, punchy bass without the muddle, closed-back headphones and living room systems that handle low-end, plus a rotating crate of old album vinyl if you're rebuilding a 60s-90s collection. Every product page tells you who it's for, 3 pros, 1 con, and why we picked it. So you can choose with confidence. Flying soon? Check. VIP for noise canceling that tames plane roar. Mostly listening at home? Try open-back headphones that let live albums breathe. Want instant gratification vinyl? Our fully automatic turntable is 1 button from silence to music, and the record cleaning kit knocks down crackle so the bass tightens up. Headed to shows? Grab high-fidelity earplugs, hands-free at home. Our smart speaker picks let you say, play 70s reggae or classic pop, and you're there. Deal alert! If you use the link in the description, you'll land on our curated picks with current best available Amazon pricing and active discounts where applicable. Prices change, so buy now to lock in today's deal. Tap the link in the description, pick your aisle, grab a favorite, and tell me which category you want me to build next. The Lore Store. Listen better, with gear that gets out of the way and lets the music live.
People think Metallica in the mid-90s was just haircuts and headlines. No, the secret weapon was how the music moved. Act Y, the sound shifts, 1996, 97. They strip the songs down and thicken the punch. Load, June 96, and Reload, Nov 97. Keep Bob Rock behind the desk, but the brief changes, fewer sprints, more stomp, less chainsaw, more sledgehammer. That lets James's voice sit front and center, and it brings back real low-end power after the dry austerity of Justice. The albums land huge, but the real story is the craft. Mid-tempo grooves that still hit like a truck. Listen to what's under the hood. They drop a half step to E across Load. That darker pitch gives Hetfield more room to bite and bend phrases without losing weight. And for the first time, Kirk isn't only the lead assassin. Bob Rock has him doubling rhythms with James, making the guitars feel wider and looser, more like a band breathing together than a grid. That choice changes the whole center of gravity. Less machine, more swing. Name names, give flowers. James didn't just sing loud, he wrote like a grown man. Hero of the Day and Mama Said prove he could trade rage for vulnerability without losing spine. Slip a major key lift here, some country-schooled storytelling there, even hints of pedal steel color. Meanwhile, Kirk turns the wah-wah into a human voice, call and response with himself, so the solos speak rather than shred for points. Jason's pick attack locks with Lars's right hand, restoring the glue on the bottom that makes these mid-tempo riffs feel like moving walls. And Lars, he didn't play fastest, he played heavy, sitting just behind the beat so the riff hits you twice. Once in the chest, need more, and once in the gut. Nudge forward, 60-90s. Atmosphere is part of the musicianship. Bob Rock and mixer Randy Staub build thick air around the parts. Wide, double-tracked rhythms, drums mic'd to sound physical rather than clicky, and vocals carved to ride the crest of those stadium-sized choruses. That's why Fuel roars, why The Memory Remains works as theater. Marianne Faithfull's ghost voice turns the coda into a character, not a hook. Craft choice, not gimmick. Act 2, Try Anything, becomes a style. 1999. Now take that band tuned lower, grooving harder, writing broader, and drop a full orchestra beside them. S&M isn't a costume change, it's orchestration as arrangement. Michael Kamen doesn't just paste strings on top, he writes counter melodies that push Metallica's harmony forward, threading brass through downstrokes and turning sustained string pads into an extra amplifier for the riffs. 2 new songs, No Leaf Clover and Human, prove the point. They're built with the orchestra, not in spite of it. When the brass swells into that clover chorus, it feels inevitable, not polite. Why does it still hit? Because the musical math works. Metallica's core is still down, right-hand rhythm and chant-level melody. Kamen writes around that spine at the Berkeley Community Theater shows APR 21-22, 1999, letting woodwinds shadow James's cleaner passages and letting low strings double the rhythm guitars when the band detonates. It's heavy by harmony, not only by volume, which is why those recordings age better than a lot of symphonic metal experiments. Also, this is the last Metallica album with Jason Newsted, and you can hear how his attack and gang vocal grit help the orchestra feel welded to the band, not tacked on. Nudge forward. The image noise was loud. The music answers louder. Short hair, Serrano's bodily fluid covers, fashion talk. None of it matters once the kick and bass hit together and the strings lift the harmony. The load-reload era looked like controversy, but the lasting legacy is feel. Pocket over speed, tone over treble, song over stance. That's why so much of this material stands up live decades later. Act 3, what you can't swap out. Pull one member out and the machine changes shape. Hetfield's downstrokes and baritone cut are the engine. Without that percussive right hand, the mid-tempo crush doesn't breathe. Ulrich's weight and arrangement brain make the riffs move, fills that cue the room like a conductor's baton. Hammett's vocal wah phrasing is the emotional color, blues language inside metal frames. Newsted's low-mid bite is the mortar, especially in this era, so the big rock writing doesn't go soft in the middle. Rock came in our architects. One designs the room the band lives in, the other extends the house without breaking the foundation. Load Reload's production arc into S&M is one continuous craft decision. Curiosity gap, where this craft leads next. When you learn to control sound this tightly, you start asking who controls the files. The same band that tightened the groove and orchestrated the riff is about to pick a public fight over what music is worth and who gets to move it. Next, the Napster Wars. You don't build a myth for free. By the end of the 90s, Metallica looked untouchable on stage. Million-selling albums, stadium tours, full orchestra concerts, a logo you could spot from a parking lot away. But behind that, the machine was shaking. Act Y, burnout. You can't see from the crowd. Here's what people forget. This band never stopped. The Damaged Justice Tour, 88-89, the Black Album touring cycle, 91-93, the co-headline Stadium Chaos with Guns N' Roses and James Hetfield getting lit on fire by a pyro accident in Montreal, 92, then Load, Reload, Press, MTV, award shows, stadium after stadium, then S&M with a full orchestra in 99. That's a decade of being Metallica every single day in public and almost never being human in private. Fans saw a juggernaut. Their bodies were paying for it. Hetfield carried injuries and addiction risk. Jason Newsted's neck and back were wrecked from constant headbanging on stage. He was on painkillers just to keep going. That's the physical cost. Now the mental one. By 2000, there's tension inside the band over direction, over control, over who gets to create. Jason wants to do an outside project, Echo Brain, just make music that isn't filtered through the Metallica machine. He's told no. He feels like his identity is just the bass player in their band, not an artist in his own right. He's already the guy who had to step into Cliff Burton's Ghost. He's already the guy fans blamed when the bass was low in the mix, and now he's the guy who can't even stretch without someone calling it betrayal. That pressure cooker doesn't explode yet, but you could feel the walls flexing. And then Napster happens. Act 2, Thief versus Gatekeeper. And the band becomes the villain. In April 2000, Metallica sues Napster. Not the users first, but the platform. Their argument is simple and blunt. You're taking our music and passing it around for free without permission. Lars Ulrich points to one specific moment, a song called I Disappear, which was meant for the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack. Before it was even officially released, radio stations were already spinning leaked versions ripped from Napster. That means Metallica had lost control of their own work before it even hit stores. To them, that's not sharing, that's theft. Metallica does something nobody had ever done at that level. They walk into court and say, no, you don't get to take us. They demand Napster ban accounts trading Metallica's songs and hand over names. Napster ends up removing hundreds of thousands of users. Lars Ulrich even testifies in front of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee in July 2000, telling lawmakers this isn't just about money, it's about control of your art, about whether bands get to decide how their work is used. He calls Napster hijacking. Napster fires back. This is discovery. This is how people find music now. This is the future. And that's when Metallica's public image flips almost overnight. For fans who'd grown up with Metallica, anti-corporate, anti-authority, our guys, seeing them hand over lists of users to get them banned felt like betrayal. The internet turns on them, parodies explode, flash cartoons roast Lars as greedy and out of touch. Metallica, the band that once stood for us versus them, is suddenly being painted as them. Pause here, slow down. This is the emotional knife. Metallica thinks they're fighting for artists' survival. A big part of their own fan base thinks Metallica is fighting against the fans. That is a brutal spot for any band, and it's happening right as they're already exhausted, injured, suspicious of each other, and carrying unresolved grief from Cliff that never really healed. The legal fight works on paper. By 2001, judges are siding with Metallica and ordering Napster to block unlicensed sharing or shut down. Napster is forced to start pulling Metallica tracks from its network, and the case becomes the template for how the music industry goes after file sharing. That part is historic. It changes the entire direction of digital music. It basically sets up the streaming economy everyone lives in now, but winning in court doesn't fix what's happening inside. Act 3, Breakpoint, January 17th, 2001. Jason Newsted quits Metallica publicly. It's personal and private reasons. Behind that, it's a mix: physical damage, creative frustration, and the sense that Metallica is spending more time in fights, legal fights, internal fights, than in music. He later says he needed to save his body and his sanity, and that he wasn't allowed to grow the way he needed to grow. This is the first time since Cliff Burton's death that a core member actually walks. That's not just a lineup change, that's a warning light. Right after that, the cameras come in because at this same moment, Metallica is trying to make a new record. Instead of the usual controlled machine, what we get is chaos, documented in some kind of monster, filmed from 2001 to 2003. What that footage shows is rough. The band in a rented military barracks in San Francisco, trying to write Saint Anger with no bass player while also in group therapy with a $40,000 a month performance enhancement coach, and barely speaking to each other without it turning into a fight. Lars and James snap at each other like enemies, not partners. Kirk is just trying to hold the center, and then James disappears. Mid-session, James Hetfield walks out and goes to rehab in July 2001 for alcoholism and other addictions. Work just stops. For months, nobody even knows if there is a band anymore. Lars and Kirk keep meeting with the therapist, talking about whether Metallica is already finished, and they're just not brave enough to say the words out loud. This is the closest Metallica ever comes to actually dying. That's the cost. This wasn't just a metal band yelling about power. This was a group of human beings who had been living at maximum volume for 20 years, physically injured, mentally frayed, grieving, sued in public, mocked online, turning into a corporation in front of their own fans, and now literally in therapy, trying to figure out how to talk to each other without burning the whole thing down. The myth, biggest metal band in the world is real, but the bill for that myth is sleepless touring, resentment, addiction, legal war, and almost losing the frontman. And here's the question that's going to drive the next chapter. If you're Metallica in 2001 and you're that broken, what does coming back even look like? Because the answer is not go make another Black album. The answer is burn it down and start over. Next, the rebuild. The comeback nobody expected. The moment they prove you can survive your own legend. Most bands fade quietly. They stop getting airplay. They put out weaker albums. The tour buses get smaller and nobody says it out loud, but it's basically over. Metallica didn't fade. They detonated in front of everyone. Act Y, The Fracture, January 17th, 2001. Jason Newsted leaves Metallica. On paper, it looks simple. Personal and private reasons, but in reality, that exit is a shockwave. Jason is the guy who stepped in after Cliff Burton's death and kept the band alive when they easily could have stopped forever. He's the guy who took the hate, took the jokes, took the comparisons, and kept showing up. Him walking away isn't the bass player quit. Him walking away is one of the core pieces of the machine just said, I can't live inside this anymore. Inside the band, Everyone feels the message under the message. If Jason can burn out and quit, how close are the rest of us? And here's the first shift in energy, because Jason leaving doesn't happen in a calm moment. It happens right when Metallica is trying to start a new album, which will become Saint Anger. They rent this old military barracks in the San Francisco Bay Area and try to write as a three-piece: James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, Kirk Hammett. No stable bassist, no anchor. You can already feel the floor shaking. The cameras are rolling. They're taping everything. We're never supposed to see bands like this. Act 2, collapse in real time. The sessions are not creative, they're survival. Lars and James are fighting in ways you don't hear in the music, not musical disagreements, personal cracks. It's years of ego, control, resentment, exhaustion, and fear all boiling out in the same tiny room. Kirk is stuck in the middle trying to keep everyone from walking. There's a performance coach in the room who's basically doing couples therapy for a band that plays music about rage. You can hear the question under every argument: do you even want to still be in this with me? Then James disappears. July 2001, mid-process, James Hetfield, singer, rhythm guitarist, center of gravity, checks himself into rehab for alcoholism and addiction. Suddenly, Metallica doesn't just lose a bassist, Metallica loses James. Everything stops. This is the moment where, if you freeze frame it, Metallica is basically over. Let's sit in that for a second. Because this is not rock star drama. This is a man who's been carrying rage and grief and pressure since the early 80s, finally hitting a wall and saying out loud, if I keep going like this, I'm gonna die, or I'm gonna kill this band. And the machine can't run without him. You could swap guitarists. You could swap bassists. You cannot swap James Hetfield's voice, his right hand, his presence. Pull him out, and Metallica is not Metallica anymore. So for months, Lars and Kirk are just waiting. They meet with the therapist. They talk about whether it's time to admit the band is done. They talk like people already picking through the ruins. What if this is the end? What if the legend freezes right here? That's the second shift in energy. Because after rehab, James comes back, but he draws a line. He tells the band, and this is the part that changes everything: I will work, but I will work differently. I won't live in the studio 20 hours a day. I won't drink to get through it. I won't just swallow everything I feel. We do this in daylight, in a structured way, or we don't do it. That is not how Metallica worked before. Before, the band was the addiction. Now, survival has to come first. That sounds simple, but for a band built on constant force, it's basically reinventing the way they exist. Act 3, Reassembly. What comes out of that rebuild is Saint Anger 2003. It's ugly on purpose. The guitars are dry and rattling. There are almost no guitar solos because they wanted it to feel like a band in a room, not a polished product. Lars's drums are raw and clanging, almost like sheet metal, and that snare tone becomes one of the most argued about sounds in modern metal. The lyrics aren't epic fantasy or war stories or courtroom metaphors. They're panic, resentment, self-hate, relapse fear, control, all the stuff they never said out loud in the early days, now said straight to the mic. Lots of people hated it. A lot of old school fans said this isn't the Metallica I signed up for, but you can hear what it really is. 4 people trying to not die, because before Saint Anger is even finished, they make another move. They bring in Robert Trujillo. Robert is a monster player. Deep tone, huge presence, physical, fearless. He's played with suicidal tendencies. He's played with Ozzy. He's not just technically great, he's unshakable on stage. When he joins in 2003, Metallica finally has a full spine again. The whole cliff left in 86. The Burton Jason carried from 86 to 2001. That position is filled for real with someone who can lock in under chaos and not disappear. It's not just we hired a bassist. It's we chose life again. And this time the world actually gets to watch the whole meltdown and rebuild because all that footage, Jason quitting, James leaving, James coming back, therapy in the studio, Lars and James shouting in each other's faces, Robert getting hired, becomes the documentary Some Kind of Monster, released 2004. That film matters for two reasons. First, it kills the superhero version of Metallica. The idea that they're unbreakable, untouchable, above normal emotion, gone. You see them insecure, petty, jealous, scared, honest, protective, wounded. You see that Metallica is not a logo. It's a barely stable relationship between human beings who almost lost each other. Second, it proves they didn't end. Most acts either burn out or keep coasting or turn into their own tribute band. Metallica did something different. They hit the wall in public, shattered, and then rebuilt a new version of themselves with boundaries, with recovery, with a new lineup, and with the cameras rolling. The legend didn't fade. The legend crashed, and then it stood back up. So when people talk about the end of Metallica, this is that moment. Not because they broke up forever, they didn't, but because the version of Metallica that ran nonstop from 1981 to 2001, that band died in that room. What came after was not the same band that made Master of Puppets. It couldn't be. That band was fueled by anger and denial. This one is fueled by survival, and that takes us forward, because if you survive your own death, the question becomes, now what? What do you do with that second life? Because the next era is where Metallica stops proving they can live and starts proving they still matter. Before Metallica, heavy music in the mainstream had rules. After Metallica, everyone started chasing their rules. Act Y, Proof of Life, we're still here and we're still dangerous. In 2008, after Rehab, after Jason leaving, after Saint Anger, after public therapy and humiliation, and the feeling that the band might actually be finished, Metallica releases Death Magnetic. It hits like a message in all caps. The album is recorded with producer Rick Rubin and drops September 12th, 2008. Critics and fans hear something they weren't sure they were ever going to get again. Speed, right-hand violence, multi-part epics, that old fight the whole room energy. A lot of people call it their return to their thrash roots, not just stylistically, but spiritually. You can feel echoes of and Justice for All and Master of Puppets in the long, jagged structures, the palm-muted riffs, and the way James Hetfield locks into those marching vocal lines. But Death Magnetic isn't nostalgia cosplay. It's a survival document after everything you saw in Some Kind of Monster, the Rehab, the therapy, the near breakup. This is Metallica planting a flag and saying, no, we write this kind of music because we're the ones who invented how this music feels. That matters because it tells younger heavy bands something important. You can crash, you can almost die, and you can still come back sharp instead of safe. Reviewers called it a comeback to form. Fans called it an apology for Saint Anger. Lars Ulrich called the sound intentional, loud, raw, almost clipped because they wanted it to feel alive, not pretty. Here's the first nudge forward. The tour that follows, Death Magnetic, World Magnetic, doesn't just refill arenas, it resets the hierarchy in modern metal. Younger bands on those bills aren't opening for old legends. They're opening for the standard. Lamb of God literally says they learned from being out with Metallica, not just musically, but watching how a massive band commands a stage and survives the grind. Mark Morton from Lamb of God has said outright he'd been inspired by Metallica since first hearing Ride the Lightning, and that touring with them taught them a lot. This is legacy in real time. Metallica isn't just influencing kids in garages anymore. They're now teaching the next generation of headliners how to be headliners. Act 2, everyone's blueprint. If you look at heavy music in the 2000s and 2010s, there are fingerprints everywhere. Avenged Sevenfold, they have said directly that Metallica is a huge influence, and not in a shy way. They've talked about studying Metallica's riffs, the attitude, even the career model. How do you go from aggressive and technical to massive and anthemic without losing yourself? You can hear Sad But True style stomp and Hetfield style vocal phrasing inside songs like This Means War, and their bassist Johnny Christ said being compared to Metallica is a pretty damn good compliment because Metallica shaped how they write. Slipknot, Corey Taylor has said Metallica were one of his biggest influences because they could do everything, speed, weight, hooks, and still drag melody through all that chaos. He's literally called Metallica the blueprint for how Slipknot thinks about career longevity, about how a heavy band survives decades instead of burning out in 5 years. Lamb of God, that entire world of modern American groove, thrash, tight right-hand rhythm, political anger, ugly honesty, lives in the shadow of what Metallica did in the 80s and then revived in Death Magnetic. Morton openly says Metallica's early records rewired his brain. So even if you're a younger fan who never sat with Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets, you're still living in Metallica's echo. The way modern metal bands build live shows like events. Metallica, the way heavy vocals sit on top of riffs like a rhythm instrument instead of floating above them. Metallica, the idea that you could write about war, trauma, addiction, corruption, not girls, not cars, and still go platinum. Metallica, and the mainstream finally has to admit it. In 2009, Metallica is inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers does the honors. That ceremony is a quiet confession from the establishment. Heavy metal is American music now. It belongs in the museum. The hall doesn't hand that level of validation to just anybody. That's legacy being carved in stone while the band is still alive and still touring. That's the second nudge forward because legacy usually means they were important back then. With Metallica, legacy means they're still rewriting the present tense. Act 3, full throttle in the new era. 8 years after Death Magnetic, Metallica drops Hardwired to Self-Destruct on November 18th, 2016. It's a double album, nearly 80 minutes, released on their own label, Blackened Recordings. No middleman. They control the whole pipeline. The record doesn't sneak out, it detonates. It debuts at number 1 on the U.S. Billboard 200, selling 291,000 album equivalent units in the first week. Metallica's 6th straight studio album to open at 101, and it tops charts in 57 countries. That run makes them only the second band in Billboard history to have 6 consecutive studio albums debut at number 1. And this is in 2016 in the streaming era when guitar bands are supposedly over. That stat matters more than it sounds. It means Metallica didn't just matter back then. They're still able to walk into a pop-dominated, algorithm-driven marketplace and force guitars, double-kick drums, and Hetfield bark into the top slot in basically every major market on Earth. That's not nostalgia, that's power. Listen to what's actually on Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Songs like Hardwired, Atlas, Rise, and Moth into Flame are fast, lean, and hooky, like a bridge between the razor attack of the 80s and the stadium confidence of the 90s. Critics called it their best record since the Black Album era, saying it felt like Metallica remembered how to be Metallica and then updated it for now. They kept the riffs mean and direct. They kept the choruses punchy. They trimmed the fat. And even with the band in their 50s, James's voice still swings between menace and rallying cry. Here's what that means for legacy. Metallica helped invent modern thrash. Then they cracked the mainstream wide open. Then they crashed, rehabbed, and almost died. Then they came back, mentored the next wave, and decades later would still chart #1 worldwide with new material. That's rare. That's Beatles, Rolling Stones, Zeppelin tier, cultural gravity. We're not a band, we're an era. And it shows up in other ways. Their songs get covered by newer metal bands as a badge of respect. Their staging in the round, 360 the crowds, massive lighting rigs, becomes the template for how modern heavy bands try to turn concerts into events, not just shows. Younger singers talk about Hetfield the way earlier generations talked about Ozzy or Dio. Younger drummers study Lars's arrangement instincts, not just his fills, because they understand he's not just hitting drums, he's shaping moments. Final nudge of this chapter, by the mid-2010s, Metallica isn't just influencing what heavy music sounds like, they're influencing what it can be worth. You can still sell out stadiums playing fast, angry music with real guitars. You can still headline festivals globally off riffs, not TikTok dances. You could still write in your 50s and 60s about corruption, decay, self-destruction, obsession, and people in their teens will scream those words back to you. That's legacy, and it sets up the last question we have to answer. If a band survives 4 decades, sells in every era, creates a sound that becomes the blueprint, and still walks on stage to football stadium noise, what are they now? A museum piece, an institution, or a living weapon that keeps evolving in public right in front of us? That's Chapter 10.
Hey, Rocklore community. Before we continue, let's have a real talk for a second, bro. You know, this isn't just a channel to us. And I hope it's not just a place you come to watch a video and then forget about it. This is a community. It's a place where we get to dig up the secrets of rock and roll, share our favorite riffs, and celebrate the artists who maybe didn't get the love they deserved. Right now, only about 1% of our viewers are subscribed. We can change that together and grow this community. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button with the notification bell on. When you do, you're not just helping a channel grow, you're becoming a member of the Rocklore family. You're signaling to us and to YouTube that these stories matter, that this music is worth preserving, and that this community is a place you want to be. Subscribing is your way of making sure you're always in the loop. It means you'll be the first to know when we unearth a forgotten legend, drop a new countdown, or dive into a piece of rock history you've never heard before. So if you're a true fan of the lore, if you get that same feeling of discovery that I do, then come join us. It takes 1 second to be a part of something bigger.
If you were there back then, you already know the truth. If you weren't, now you do. Act I. This part is still happening right now. Here's the part that messes with the idea of legacy. Metallica isn't a band you only talk about in past tense. In September 2019, they walked onto the stage at the brand new Chase Center in San Francisco with a full symphony behind them, the San Francisco Symphony, and played 2 nights that weren't just concerts, they were statements. The shows were filmed and recorded, then released as S&M2 in 2,022.5 hours of Metallica, plus an orchestra, reworking their catalog live, in surround, in public view. It was also the grand opening of that arena. The whole thing was treated like civic history, not just a rock gig. That's what legacy looks like for them. It's not just nostalgia. We're still rewriting our own myth while you're watching, and then they keep going. April 14th, 2023, they dropped 72 Seasons, their first full new studio album since 2016. Released on their own label, Blackened Recordings, produced with Greg Fiddleman alongside Hetfield and Ulrich. The title is about the first 72 seasons of your life, basically who you are by the time you become an adult, who shapes you, and what damage you carry. That's a band more than 40 years in, still talking about childhood, identity, anger, survival, and it doesn't arrive quietly. It launches alongside a global stadium tour. That is not normal. That's your first nudge. This isn't a reunion act. This is an active machine. Act 2. The new religion is live. The M72 World Tour is where you really see how far this has gone. 2 nights in most cities. No repeat weekends. That means if you buy a 2-day ticket, you get 2 totally different full sets, over 30 songs total, and you don't hear the same song twice. They're literally designing an experience where night 1 and night 2 are different chapters of the band's life. That's museum thinking, but delivered at stadium volume, and they build a stage for it like nobody else. Instead of a normal stage, at one end of the stadium, Metallica sets up in the round, dead center on the field, and moves the famous snake pit to the middle of that structure. So fans are surrounded by the band in 360 degrees. You are inside the band, not in front of it. People in that pit talk about how there's no big security moat and no 6-foot gap. The band is right there moving around you like you're in rehearsal, except it's a football stadium. That stage design becomes part of the story now. They broadcast those shows to cinemas, full stadium nights, Arlington, Texas, Barcelona, Amsterdam, London, live streamed into theaters in more than 70 countries, so fans are headbanging in movie seats like it's their personal festival. Reviewers called it proof that Metallica can still connect like a young band, not like a heritage act. That matters. It means new fans aren't discovering Metallica as classic rock. They're discovering Metallica as their band right now. That's the second nudge. Most bands age into respect. Metallica aged into global circulation. Act 3, the anthem and the ask. And through all of this, something beautiful and a little unbelievable has happened. A song James Hetfield once wrote alone, quietly, thinking maybe no one would ever hear it because it felt too personal, nothing else matters, is now the song that whole stadiums sing back the loudest. That video has cleared the 1 billion view mark on YouTube, and it still shows them in the studio. No ego, no costumes, just the core. What started as one man's private voice memo is now everybody's chorus. That's legacy. The intimate thing becomes the ritual. Metallica influenced the look, black shirt, boots, no gloss. They influenced the business, owning their masters, releasing on their own label, deciding their own tour rules. They influenced the sound. Every modern heavy act with tight downstrokes and real drums and lyrics about trust, war, addiction, trauma, all of them are pulling from this blueprint, whether they admit it or not. You don't have to like metal to live in a world metal helped build. Now I'm talking just to you. If you were there back then, if you remember bootleg tapes, if you remember buying Master of Puppets on cassette, if you remember the fight over Napster, if you remember James coming back from the fire and from rehab, you already know what this band cost to stay alive. If you weren't, now you do. So tell me this in the comments, because this is how we keep this real and not just algorithm dust. What was the first Metallica song that hit you in the chest? Be honest, was it Fade to Black? Enter Sandman? Nothing Else Matters? Something from 72 Seasons? I want to know where you entered the story. Who from that era deserves a full deep dive next? Cliff Burton's short, Bright Life? Jason Newsted's Lost Years? The Day I Disappear leaked and started a war with the entire internet? Or do we go inside the Black Album sessions and talk about how close they were to tearing each other apart while making the most famous metal record on earth, Hits Daily Double? And tell me this, what did radio sleep on that you still haven't let go of? Because here's the truth, history doesn't archive itself. Platforms erase, labels rewrite, streams vanish. The only reason this story survives is because people like you keep saying it out loud. This is rock lore. Subscribe so this history doesn't get erased by the algorithm. And when you're done here, go watch the next chapter in this series, the night everything should have ended, the crash in Sweden, and the moment Metallica had to decide if they were a band or a memory